Well, less than 48 hours after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reshuffled his top team, his party has descended into civil war. Sacked Suella Braverman, launching a blistering attack on her former boss, accusing him of betrayal, weak leadership and breaking a series of his key pledges. In the searing 3-page letter, the former Home Secretary saying, quote, "Your rejection of this path was not merely a betrayal of our agreement, but a betrayal of your promise to the nation that you would do whatever it takes to stop the boats. You have manifestly and repeatedly failed to deliver on every single one of these key policies. Either your distinctive style of government means you're incapable of doing so, or, as I must surely conclude now, you never had any intention of keeping your promises." Blistering indeed. Look, Downing Street tonight shooting back, saying the Prime Minister, quote, believes in actions, not words, and is proud to appoint a strong, united team. But it could be about to get a whole lot worse, Rishi Sunak. Suella Braverman tonight claiming she has bombshell documents proving Sunak broke promises to her, and around 20 MPs supporting her today, publicly warning the Prime Minister he is abandoning the 2019 voters who put the party in power. Now, all of this comes ahead of tomorrow's Supreme Court judgment on sending illegal migrants to Rwanda, with another accusation from Suella tonight: the government is not prepared for a loss. It was already set to be a huge moment for the government tomorrow, but no doubt it'll be even bigger because of all of this. I've just been speaking to Conservative MP Geoffrey Clifton-Brown and got his reaction to the letter.
Well, it's a fair hand grenade sort of a letter. I think that there are two things to be said about it. Firstly, the Home Secretary, or the ex-Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is no doubt feeling a bit bruised and therefore wants to give the Prime Minister a broadside. Having said that, we're only getting her side of the story. We're not getting the Prime Minister's side of the story. And I think in any difference of opinion, you really want to hear both sides of the story and then make up your mind what you think.
Are there bits in the letter that you agree with on her stance on Sunak?
Not much, I have to say. I think they had more, rather like the issue of Suella and the police. They had plenty of opportunity to resolve their differences in private. And I think, obviously, there were differences of opinion, but the Prime Minister has to consider the wider implications of all his actions, what least of which is how is it going to affect the country, how is it going to affect his party, and how difficult are the various measures to get through Parliament. So I think the Prime Minister's got a lot wider things to think about than just the Home Secretary. And after all, we need to wait and see what is happening in the Supreme Court ruling tomorrow.
I mean, one could certainly argue that's the reason for the timing of this letter, other than, of course, the dismissal yesterday. But look, in terms of the accusations that Braverman is making in her letter to Sunak, it's more than just private disagreement. She's basically accusing him of shortchanging the British people that voted them in 2019. She's saying you're not delivering on anything. She was going behind the scenes trying to get him to sign off on things, and he just wasn't. So she's accused him of basically politely taking up space in office.
Well, I mean, she's put a one-sided view. There have been some successes. We've had an agreement with Albania to send 90% of their people who were coming in large numbers last year to this country back. We've passed the very controversial Immigration and Nationality Act, as it is now, which will enable us to circumvent certain parts of the ECHR, which she is saying we should leave. And so I think she's being a little bit one-sided and partial by not giving us the complete story.
Look, in terms of what happened yesterday, sacking Braverman and then bringing back Cameron, do you think both of those moves are moving your party in the right direction?
I think that actually bringing back Cameron is a good move because he has got the status around the world. He will be able to open doors. He will leave the Prime Minister free to concentrate on other things rather than having to travel around the world himself quite so much. And so I think actually the appointment of Cameron is a very good one.
Now, bear with me on this hypothetical, but if you were Rishi Sunak, would you respond to Suella Braverman's letter?
No.
There we go. Quite simply. And why?
Because I think it would just simply put more flames on the fire. It will enable her to come back with more vitriol. I think often in these situations, the least said, soonest mended. So I wouldn't be inclined to respond.
Conservative MP Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, joining me here in the studio now is the Deputy Political Editor for the Sunday Times, Harry York. And Harry, the verbiage around today is unprecedented, scathing, blistering. In your political journalism career, how does this rank, this letter?
It's unprecedented. I have never seen such an excoriating resignation letter from a outgoing Secretary of State to a Prime Minister. And as Geoffrey Clifton-Brown was just outlining there, I mean, there is a lot of aggression coming through in her letter. And I think this is less a resignation letter as an open declaration of war. I mean, it's just worth recapping what she's saying. She is saying that Rishi Sunak entered into a binding agreement with her when he became leader. In return for her support, he agreed to a document that set out 4 concrete promises that he would deliver. And she's saying he's failed to deliver on every single one of them. But it's not just the fact that she's enhancing this betrayal narrative, which we've already seen with Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries in recent months. She's also, just the language that she's using is extraordinary. She's calling the Prime Minister weak. She says he's betrayed his promises not only to her, but the British public. And she said that he doesn't have a plan B should the Supreme Court rule against them over the Rwanda policy tomorrow. And even if the government wins tomorrow, she says because he backed down and failed to take the kind of unpopular, maybe controversial choices in legislation that she had been advocating, that the government, even if they win, it's going to take months for them to get any of the flights off the ground. So it is really quite a damning indictment from her perspective.
And yeah, let's talk about the timing of this, because not only does it come after, obviously, her sacking on Monday as Home Secretary, but before this Supreme Court ruling on the Rwanda decision. And the wording in her letter, as I was reading it, it's almost like she thinks it's a foregone conclusion that the government is not going to win this case. That was just my interpretation of it. Yeah. Obviously, they don't know how the Supreme Court is going to rule.
You could look at it another way, and I think she's actually hedging her bets somewhat, which is that a lot of the potency of what she says tonight will rest on if the Supreme Court finds against the government tomorrow and rules the policy to be unlawful. I think a lot of her criticisms will actually fall away somewhat if the government wins tomorrow, because she said her big thing, let's face it, if she's on the backbenches, will be to campaign to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. Mm-hmm. Now, if the government wins tomorrow, that won't necessarily be necessary, because their policy has been deemed to be lawful and compliant. So there's a lot riding on tomorrow. We shouldn't understate the implications. And I think the stakes were high already. Rishi Sunak has staked his premiership on some key issues, but the most fundamental one of those, apart from inflation and the economy, is tackling the boats. And if he loses tomorrow, he's got to come up with an alternative. And Suella Braverman is saying very clearly tonight that she doesn't think he has one.
Now, before we bring in some more analysis on that, let's just focus on that immigration point, because it's what she narrows in very closely on, which is this deal they apparently came to, Sunak and Braverman, that she was going to be his Home Secretary. She also credits herself with getting him into power as Prime Minister, and says, we promised that we would deliver these points in immigration. Every time I've come to you to try and get these points passed, you equivocate, disregard, you've had lack of interest. How do you think that's going to wash with some of the voters to see that? Yeah,
it'd be interesting. I mean, lots of people probably think that already. I think a lot of the people that Suella Braverman is appealing to, the kind of right of the Conservative Party who might be toying with the idea of defecting to the Reform side, they already think that Rishi Sunak is too soft on immigration. And her words probably just will confirm their view already. There is, however, I think it'll be interesting to see how the government responds to her criticisms, because there's 2 key points in what she says. She says that I pushed and you promised to have these notwithstanding clauses in the illegal immigration bill. And to your viewers, they probably won't know what those are. They're basically clauses which would have required the UK government or allowed the UK government to ignore rulings from the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg. And that would have basically meant they could have gone ahead with the Rwanda plan without challenge. Now, I've been speaking to some people in government tonight, and a very senior former government lawyer who says that's just not how this works in practice. These notwithstanding clauses, they allow you to disregard international law in UK law, but it doesn't stop people from taking you still to Strasbourg. And then once the court's issued a ruling, then the UK government would basically have to decide whether it ignores that ruling, in which case, you probably have to come out of the European Court, the European Convention of Human Rights. So it isn't really that plain sailing. And I think the criticism of Suella Braverman is it's all well and good taking these maximalist positions, but in the actual reality of politics and international diplomacy, that's just not how it works.
Putting a lot of weight in the word notwithstanding. Look, Harry York, thank you for joining us.